games. You know, and I played for money too. Is there a party game that you're especially good at?
No, I mean, I was
The
playing.
lights flash, 1,000 at once, bathing her in a brilliance that feels both divine and merciless. Anne Hathaway stands beneath them, every inch the Hollywood dream, flawless, composed, and impossibly radiant. Cameras chase her every move, each smile she gives becoming a currency of charm, each gesture a performance of grace. To millions, she is the embodiment of beauty and success, the woman who made dreams feel attainable. But behind that perfection lies a quiet ache, one that fame never silenced, only concealed. Her smile, the same one that melted hearts in the Princess Diaries, became her shield. The same laughter that filled press rooms and red carpets was at times a survival tactic. She learned early that in an industry built on perception, vulnerability could be weaponized. The world wanted her to be a symbol of lightness, the princess who turned into a queen, and she gave them that illusion, even when the weight of expectation began to crush the spirit beneath it. Hollywood adored her beauty, but questioned her sincerity. When Anne spoke with too much enthusiasm, they called her fake. When she expressed emotion, they called her performative. Every success she achieved came with an echo of doubt, a whisper that she was too polished, too perfect, too much. The woman who once represented innocence found herself accused of inauthenticity, as though being composed was a sin. And yet, behind the glittering facade was a woman searching desperately for belonging, someone who didn't quite know where Anne Hathaway, the human being, ended and Anne Hathaway, the idea, began. In interviews, her voice often trembled between confidence and fear, as if she was fighting to prove her right to be loved not for the character she played, but for the person she truly was. But that was the cruel paradox of her stardom. She became everything the world wanted her to be, and in doing so, risked losing herself entirely. Fame did not free her. It confined her within an image that was impossible to maintain. Every gown, every red carpet, every tearful acceptance speech became part of a narrative she no longer controlled. The applause grew louder, but inside, the silence deepened. There is something haunting about watching a woman smile when the world refuses to see her pain. In Anne's case, that pain was hidden behind cinematic perfection. Her delicate expressions, her eloquent words, her radiant optimism. It was as if she believed that if she smiled wide enough, spoke kindly enough, worked hard enough, the world would finally let her be enough. But Hollywood does not forgive authenticity easily. It thrives on illusion. As years passed, she learned to wear her armor more naturally. Charm became instinct, poise became reflex. Yet behind those dark, expressive eyes, there was often a flicker of exhaustion. She had conquered an industry that devours its own, but she knew the cost. The same world that celebrated her Oscar win for Les Misérables once turned against her, mocking her vulnerability, dissecting her every gesture until her very existence became a spectacle of contradiction. The illusion of a perfect smile, that was her masterpiece and her tragedy. Beneath its beauty lay the story of a woman who spent years performing not just for the camera, but for the world itself. She gave people the fairy tale they wanted, even when she no longer believed in it.
And as she stood in front of endless lights, with every click of the camera echoing like thunder, she must have wondered, when does pretending to be perfect become the only role you're allowed to play?
The Making of a Dreamer. Anne Jacqueline Hathaway was born on November 12, 1982, in Brooklyn, New York. A child of light, born into a world of restless ambition and quiet contradictions. Her mother, Kate Macaulay, was an actress who once graced the stage with the same passion her daughter would inherit, while her father, Gerald Hathaway, was a lawyer, logical, grounded, a man of reason. From the very beginning, Anne existed between two worlds, art and order, emotion and restraint, dream and duty. When she was 6, her family moved to Millburn, New Jersey, a suburban calm that hid a young girl's imagination. She was bright, sensitive, almost painfully empathetic. The kind of child who felt too much, who absorbed the moods of others like oxygen. At school, she was polite but intense, her teachers often saying she seemed older than her years, as if her soul had been borrowed from another time. Her mother's presence on stage ignited something fierce within her, an almost sacred hunger to perform. She would sit in the theater seats, watching her mother transform under the stage lights, mesmerized not by the applause, but by the emotion that filled the air. It was there, in the dim glow of rehearsals and forgotten props, that Anne fell in love with storytelling. The way a person could become someone else, and in doing so, reveal their truest self. But childhood was not untouched by shadows. Anne grew up Catholic, her faith once deep and unquestioning, until she learned that the church condemned her brother's sexuality. That moment cracked something within her, a fracture between belief and compassion, between doctrine and love. It was one of the earliest heartbreaks of her life, and it shaped the woman she would become, one who refused to stay silent when silence caused pain. There was also the quiet ache of perfectionism, a trait inherited from both parents, nurtured by ambition and sharpened by fear. Even as a child, she demanded too much of herself. Every mistake felt like failure, every disapproval like rejection. She learned early that being good wasn't enough. She had to be exceptional. That drive would later fuel her ascent to stardom, but it would also become the very thing that hollowed her from within. In high school, she joined theater clubs, sang in plays, and stunned audiences with her maturity. Teachers saw in her a spark of something extraordinary, not just talent, but truth. When she performed, she didn't act, she felt. She bled emotion through her eyes and voice, as if some part of her needed to escape the quiet confines of her real life. Acting wasn't merely a dream, it was her survival. Yet, behind her youthful ambition was fragility. The more she was praised, the more she feared losing that approval. The mirror became her confidant and her critic. Every role she imagined carried a whisper, "Be perfect or disappear." It was an unspoken promise she made to herself, long before Hollywood ever noticed her, that she would never let anyone see her break, no matter how heavy the expectations became. By the time she reached her late teens, that promise had already begun to shape her destiny. The stage no longer felt big enough for her dreams. Her eyes turned toward the silver screen, toward the world that could make
or destroy a person in a single headline. She didn't yet know which it would be for her, only that she was willing to give everything for a chance to find out. In the soft haze of her youth, surrounded by family dinners, Catholic guilt, and theatrical dreams, Anne Hathaway was being molded by invisible hands, the world's applause still distant, but already echoing faintly in her imagination. She didn't know it yet, but she was preparing to step into a role that would define her life, one that would blur forever the line between the girl who felt everything and the woman who learned to hide it.
First steps and struggles. The journey began quietly, far from the shimmering lights that would one day define her. In her teenage years, Anne Hathaway stepped into acting not as a choice, but as a calling. It was as if the universe had whispered her purpose long before she fully understood it. She joined a performing arts program in high school, immersing herself in Shakespeare, musicals, and stagecraft, losing hours in the dream of transformation. Each performance was both an escape and a confession. She could become anyone she wanted, and perhaps, for a little while, forget who she really was. When she was 16, she landed her first television role on Get Real, a short-lived family drama that would serve as her quiet introduction to Hollywood's chaotic machinery. For most teenagers, this might have been a thrilling adventure. For Anne, it was a baptism by fire. The hours were long, the industry intimidating, and behind every kind smile lurked a silent judgment. Are you special enough to stay? The show didn't last. It was canceled after one season, and just like that, her first taste of fame dissolved into uncertainty. But somewhere between disappointment and resilience, she found the courage to keep going. She had seen what the dream looked like, and she wanted more, even if it meant walking into a world that could chew her up and never apologize. Auditions came and went, some hopeful, some humiliating. She would take long train rides into the city, clutching a small folder of headshots, wearing borrowed confidence like a coat that didn't quite fit. Casting directors would smile politely, sometimes dismissively, and she'd leave with tears burning behind her eyes, whispering to herself, "Next time, they'll see me." The breakthrough seemed impossibly far, until in a moment of cinematic fate, Disney came calling. She was cast as Mia Thermopolis in The Princess Diaries, 2001, a story about an awkward, insecure girl who discovers she's a princess. The irony was beautiful and cruel, because Anne was Mia. The clumsiness, the self-doubt, the longing to be seen. It wasn't a performance, it was a revelation. But behind the sweetness of that dream come true was a fear that success could vanish as easily as it appeared. Hollywood loved ingenues, but it rarely protected them. Every interview, every magazine cover became an audition for belonging. She had to smile wider, speak softer, and prove she was grateful, always grateful, for being given a place in a world that reminded her constantly it could take it away. In those early years, she learned the price of ambition. She saw how easily warmth could turn into condescension, how a young woman's confidence could be misunderstood as arrogance. There were moments she would leave glamorous events and sit alone in her car, exhausted from performing off-camera. She was living the dream, and yet she often felt like an imposter inside it. Her parents' voices still echoed in her mind, her father's reason, her mother's artistry, pulling her in two directions. One told her to protect her heart,
The other told her to give it away completely. And Anne, like so many young dreamers before her, chose the latter. The struggle of her early career wasn't just about finding work. It was about finding balance between the girl who loved to act and the woman who feared being consumed by it, between the kindness she wanted to offer and the hardness she needed to survive. Those first steps, those early disappointments, became the foundation of her resilience. She learned how to fall gracefully, how to rise quietly, how to keep faith in her craft even when the applause faded. In those unseen years, the train rides, the auditions, the silent tears after rejection, Anne Hathaway was not just building a career, she was building armor. And that armor, polished with pain and persistence, would soon be tested in ways she never imagined. Because her fairy tale beginning was only the prologue to something far more complex, a story of triumph, love, betrayal, and reinvention. A story where the same girl who once dreamed of wearing a tiara would learn the true cost of being adored by the world.
The breakthrough moment. Every dream has a moment when fantasy meets reality, when years of longing collapse into a single, life-altering yes. For Anne Hathaway, that moment arrived with the kind of fairy tale irony that only Hollywood could script. It was 1999. A 19-year-old girl from New Jersey, earnest, eye-wide, trembling with hope, walked into an audition for a Disney film no one yet expected to define a generation. The Princess Diaries was a light-hearted story, a Cinderella tale of an awkward teenager who discovers she's heir to a European throne. The role demanded warmth, wit, and humility, and balance almost impossible to fake. And yet, Anne didn't fake it. She lived it. From the moment she read for the part of Mia Thermopolis, something electric stirred in the room. The producers saw it, the unpolished authenticity, the vulnerability disguised as humor. There was nothing artificial about her awkwardness. It was real. When she tripped on a chair during her audition, she laughed at herself instead of apologizing. That laughter, that honesty, sealed her fate. When the film was released, it was magic. Overnight, Anne Hathaway became America's new sweetheart, the relatable girl who embodied every young dreamer's secret wish, that ordinary could turn into extraordinary. Children adored her. Parents trusted her. Studios wanted her. She was no longer just Anne from Milburn. She was the Princess Diaries girl, the face of optimism in an uncertain world. But fame, even the innocent kind, comes with invisible strings. The same innocence that made her beloved also made her vulnerable. Hollywood didn't see a young woman with talent and depth. It saw a brand, a symbol of wholesomeness, purity, safety. She was cast again and again as the good girl, the dreamer, the uncorrupted soul. The audience loved her, but the industry began to trap her inside that very love. She followed her debut with Ella Enchanted, and The Princess Diaries too, both sweet, charming, and safe. But Anne wanted more. She wanted to test her limits, to shatter the porcelain shell that had been built around her. The world thought it knew who she was. She was about to prove them wrong. In 2005, she took a risk that would redefine her career. Brokeback Mountain, a quiet, devastating film about forbidden love, was nothing like the sparkling Disney world she'd come from. Playing the wife of a closeted cowboy, Anne brought a maturity and depth that silenced critics. It was as though the girl next door had turned into a woman overnight, and not everyone was ready for it. The transformation continued with The Devil Wears Prada, 2006. Suddenly, Anne stood beside Meryl Streep, holding her own in a film that exposed the ruthless glamour of the fashion world.
It was a cultural moment, a coming of age, not just for her character, but for Anne herself. Audiences who once saw her as a teenage princess now saw a woman navigating power, ambition, and identity. Her life was changing faster than she could process. Awards, interviews, designer gowns. The machinery of fame moved at a dizzying pace. But in quiet moments, when the cameras turned off, she often felt adrift. The applause was intoxicating, yet strangely hollow. It celebrated her image, not her truth. And beneath the surface of her success, a shadow was forming. The price of transformation, the emotional toll of reinvention. She was no longer the innocent girl Hollywood adored, nor the confident woman she pretended to be. She was something in between, a soul in transition, trying to understand who she truly was when the costumes were gone. The breakthrough that had given her everything also began to take pieces of her away. Fame had opened every door, but it had also locked her inside a glass room, transparent, admired, and desperately alone. That was the paradox of Anne Hathaway's rise. She had achieved everything she ever dreamed of, only to discover that dreams, once fulfilled, are rarely as soft as they appear. Behind every success was a silent echo, asking a question she couldn't yet answer. Now that the world sees you, do you still see yourself?
The price of perfection. The 2010s arrived like a crown of light for Anne Hathaway, golden, dazzling, and heavy with expectation. She had become the face of modern Hollywood, intelligent, versatile, endlessly graceful. The young girl who once stumbled her way through a Disney transformation was now commanding the world's biggest stages. Each film she touched seemed to shimmer. The Devil Wears Prada, Rachel Getting Married, Love and Other Drugs, The Dark Knight Rises, and finally, Les Misérables. It was Les Misérables that changed everything. As Fantine, she delivered a performance so raw it seemed to pierce through the screen itself. Gone was the polished charm, the perfect composure. In its place was a trembling, hollowed soul, stripped of vanity and drenched in pain. When she sang, "I Dreamed a Dream," it wasn't just acting, it was confession. The tears were real. The desperation lived. For once, Anne didn't have to pretend. She was finally allowed to break. That performance earned her an Academy Award, the industry's highest honor. On the night she stood holding that golden statue, the applause roared like thunder. Her smile, that luminous, radiant smile, shone brighter than ever. Yet behind it was something unspoken, almost fragile. She whispered, "It came true." The cameras loved it. The world celebrated it. But inside, Anne felt something deeper, the quiet fear that she had just reached the top of a mountain she didn't remember climbing. Because with perfection came pressure. Hollywood didn't just admire her, it dissected her. Every red carpet expression, every acceptance speech, every gesture was replayed and judged. What should have been a moment of triumph turned into a storm of scrutiny. Some called her fake, others too eager to please. The same sincerity that had once made her beloved now made her a target. It was one of the cruelest ironies of her career, that her authenticity was mistaken for artifice, her vulnerability for performance. She was living inside the contradiction of being too perfect for a world that worships flaws. Every word she spoke was analyzed for intention, every smile doubted, every tear questioned. And slowly she began to retreat.
Behind closed doors, the constant noise of public opinion became deafening. The woman who had once embraced the spotlight began to flinch beneath it. The joy of creation, the love of acting that once lit her from within, started to feel like survival. She no longer knew if she was working for herself or for the world's approval. Still, she delivered brilliance. She transformed into Catwoman in The Dark Knight Rises, seductive yet tormented. She soared through sci-fi with Interstellar, balancing intellect with empathy. She danced through musicals, dramas, and comedies with ease, mastering every genre as if proving something to no one but herself. But the more she succeeded, the lonelier the summit became. Success, after all, is its own kind of isolation. Fame demands a constant reinvention, a willingness to burn parts of yourself for the warmth of admiration. And Anne, ever the professional, ever the perfectionist, kept burning, quietly, beautifully, painfully. There is a haunting image that captures this paradox. Anne standing under the lights, flawless in a designer gown, her laughter echoing through the noise of cameras, and behind her eyes, a flicker of exhaustion. It wasn't sadness exactly, but something deeper, a yearning for stillness in a life that never stopped moving. Her career had reached its peak. The world called her unstoppable, untouchable. But the truth, the one she carried quietly inside her, was that no one stands on the mountain forever. The higher you climb, the thinner the air becomes. And as Anne Hathaway looked out from the summit of her own success, the applause ringing like thunder, she couldn't help but feel the silence that always follows it. A silence that would soon grow louder than she ever expected.
Behind the smile. In the quiet hours when the cameras turned away, Anne Hathaway was not the star the world imagined. She was a woman trying to hold herself together, piece by piece, smile by smile. Hollywood had crowned her its modern queen, but the crown, she would later admit, was heavier than anyone could see. After her Oscar triumph, Anne's life should have been perfect. She had achieved everything she had ever dreamed of: fame, recognition, love. She was married to actor and jewelry designer Adam Schulman, a man who seemed to ground her, a rare, calm presence in a world built on chaos. Yet beneath that surface of serenity, something darker began to grow. Not from failure, but from success itself. The years following her Oscar win were supposed to be filled with light. Instead, they became a labyrinth of judgment and misunderstanding. Anne became the target of an unexpected cultural backlash. It wasn't just criticism, it was ridicule. She was mocked for her speeches, for being too earnest, too polished, too perfect. The same warmth and sincerity that had once made audiences fall in love with her were now labeled as insincere. The Internet called it the Anne Hathaway hate train. And for Anne, it was devastating. She had spent her entire life chasing excellence, not because she wanted to be adored, but because she wanted to belong, to be seen, truly seen for her art and her soul. Yet the more she gave, the more people doubted her. She once said in an interview, "I had to stop pretending I was okay when I wasn't." Those words carried the weight of years of quiet suffering. During this time, she pulled back from Hollywood's chaos.
Fame had become a mirror that reflected everything but her true self. She started avoiding red carpets, interviews, even certain roles that demanded her to be the public darling again. In private, she began exploring what peace meant: therapy, reflection, and silence. But peace does not come easily to those who have lived in applause. There were days when she questioned her worth, when the weight of public perception pressed down like a stone on her chest. The heartbreak wasn't in losing fame. It was in realizing how fragile love from the world can be. One moment it lifts you, the next it leaves you gasping in its shadow. And then came a deeper wound, one the world didn't see. Anne spoke openly years later about her painful struggles with fertility. She and her husband longed for a child, but the journey was anything but easy. Each passing month became a test of faith and heartbreak. In her announcement of her first pregnancy, she wrote, "For everyone going through infertility and conception hell, please know it was not a straight line for any of my pregnancies." That confession revealed a side of her rarely seen, vulnerable, unfiltered, raw. While she faced personal grief, the external world continued to question her every move. Tabloids speculated, fans debated, and critics searched for flaws. Fame had built a palace around her, but one without windows. Inside, Anne struggled with anxiety and the weight of constant observation. Yet within the wreckage of that pain, something beautiful began to rebuild. She stopped apologizing for being herself. She embraced the imperfection she once feared. "I didn't feel comfortable being me, but I realized I didn't have to earn the right to exist." She became an advocate for women's mental health, equality, and authenticity. In her vulnerability, she found strength, not the kind that wins awards, but the kind that survives heartbreak. By the time she became a mother, her perspective shifted completely. Her son, Jonathan, became her quiet anchor, proof that life's truest joys often come in whispers, not applause. Later, with the birth of her second child, Jack, she rediscovered balance. Fragile, fleeting, but real. Still, the shadows never vanished completely. The fear of being misunderstood lingered like a ghost behind her smile. But this time, she carried it with grace. In the end, Anne Hathaway learned the most painful truth of all: that being loved by millions means nothing if you can't love yourself. And for the first time, she wasn't chasing perfection. She was learning to breathe again, not as a movie star, but as a woman who had finally made peace with her own reflection.
The Silent Years, Redemption. The world moves fast, but Anne Hathaway chose to move slower. After the storm, the fame, the backlash, the invisible wounds, came the silence. Not the kind filled with emptiness, but the kind where a soul begins to heal. Hollywood's cameras had turned their lenses toward new faces, younger stars, brighter flames. But Anne, for the first time, didn't chase the light. She let the darkness cradle her. There was something profoundly brave in her disappearance. For an actress who had once been everywhere, every magazine cover, every red carpet, every award show, to suddenly vanish felt almost defiant. But in truth, it was not rebellion. It was survival. She was learning to live without performance. In those years of withdrawal, Anne rediscovered the small rituals of ordinary life. Early morning walks in New York, her son's laughter echoing through the apartment.
evenings spent cooking, writing, and unlearning perfection. She found that peace was not a grand achievement, it was a daily practice. She said once, "I used to think happiness was something you earned. Now I think it's something you allow." Those words became a quiet manifesto. Hollywood, however, is not kind to silence. Absence in that world is often mistaken for irrelevance. Rumors began to whisper that she was done, that she'd lost her spark, that she'd chosen comfort over greatness. But what no one knew was that Anne was preparing for something deeper, a rebirth. It came not with a blockbuster, but with a quiet performance in a small film that few expected, Colossal, 2016. It was a strange, metaphorical movie about a woman confronting the monster inside her, a role that mirrored Anne's own journey. Critics who once mocked her suddenly saw something new: rawness, honesty, control. It was as though she had stopped trying to prove she was good and instead began showing that she was real. From there, a slow, steady transformation began. Films like Ocean 8, The Intern, and Rachel Getting Married revealed layers of a woman who had walked through fire and come out gentler, wiser, less afraid. Each role was a mirror of her personal evolution, less about perfection, more about truth. But Anne's redemption wasn't in her career resurgence. It was in her ability to forgive herself, the industry, the people who had misunderstood her. She began speaking publicly about the toxicity of online hate, the impossible beauty standards, and the quiet trauma that fame inflicts on women. Her vulnerability became her strength. She wasn't trying to be America's sweetheart anymore. She was trying to be human. And then there were moments of light. A standing ovation at a film festival where she wasn't the ingenue anymore, but the survivor. A fan's letter that said, "You helped me believe I could start over too." The warmth of her son's hand and hers after a long day of work, reminding her of what truly mattered. Anne once said, "I've realized that the things I used to be afraid of, failing, aging, being forgotten, aren't tragedies. The real tragedy would be never knowing myself." Those words carried the essence of her redemption. She had finally learned to stand in her truth no matter who was watching. In those silent years, Anne Hathaway did not fade, she transformed. The young girl who once dreamed of saving the world with her performances had become a woman who saved herself. The redemption was not cinematic. It was real, imperfect, human. And perhaps that was the greatest role she would ever play.
Legacy and symbolism. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest stories. What once was scandal becomes lesson. What once was pain becomes poetry. Anne Hathaway's life, once dissected, mocked, and misunderstood, has quietly evolved into a parable for endurance. Her legacy is not carved only in awards or roles, but in the quiet revolution she brought to what it means to survive fame and still remain kind. Anne's name, once attached to perfection, is now whispered alongside something far more powerful: authenticity. She did not just outlast an era, she reshaped it. In an industry that feeds on reinvention, she refused to reinvent. She chose instead to reveal. Behind every role, every polished smile, was a woman confronting her own contradictions: grace and guilt, light and darkness, ambition and vulnerability. That honesty, once her greatest burden, became her greatest weapon.
When young actresses now enter Hollywood, they often mention her not as a distant star, but as a compass. They remember her speeches about empathy, her refusal to tear down other women for applause, her courage to speak about mental health before it became a trend. Anne's voice, steady and deliberate, echoed what many felt but couldn't say, that success means nothing if it costs your soul. Her Oscar for Les Misérables was a moment of cinematic immortality, but her true award came years later, the ability to walk through red carpets again with peace in her eyes, no longer hiding, no longer defending, just existing. That quiet confidence became the symbolism of her story, the triumph of the human heart over the noise of the world. There is something deeply universal in her journey. She represents the millions of women told they are too much, too emotional, too ambitious, too outspoken, and shows that the very traits society once mocked can become the foundation of power. Her story reminds us that sensitivity is not weakness, that failure is not final, and that forgiveness, especially self-forgiveness, can be revolutionary. When film historians speak of her work, they highlight the range, from the innocence of the Princess Diaries to the devastation of Les Misérables, from the grace of The Devil Wears Prada to the surreal bravery of Colossal. But beyond the films lies a thread connecting them all, the portrayal of women searching for their truth in a world that wants to define them. That is Anne Hathaway's greatest artistic fingerprint. In her interviews, there's a serenity now, a kind of unspoken wisdom. She often smiles at the irony that the same media that once tore her down now celebrates her resilience. But she doesn't seek revenge. She doesn't need to. The world came full circle, and she remains standing, softer but unbroken. To many, she is no longer just an actress. She is a mirror, reflecting the struggle of being seen and unseen, loved and hated, rising and falling, and rising again. Her legacy transcends Hollywood. It belongs to anyone who has ever been misunderstood for simply being themselves. And in that quiet transcendence lies the symbolism of Anne Hathaway, the girl who learned that even when the lights fade, the truth within still glows. She showed the world that survival is not about outshining others, it's about outlasting your own fear. Her legacy is not written in the applause of a moment, but in the whispers of those she inspired, those who, because of her, found courage in their imperfections.
Legacy and symbolism. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest stories. What once was scandal becomes lesson. What once was pain becomes poetry. Anne Hathaway's life, once dissected, mocked, and misunderstood, has quietly evolved into a parable for endurance. Her legacy is not carved only in awards or roles, but in the quiet revolution she brought to what it means to survive fame and still remain kind. Anne's name, once attached to perfection, is now whispered alongside something far more powerful: authenticity. She did not just outlast an era, she reshaped it. In an industry that feeds on reinvention, she refused to reinvent. She chose instead to reveal. Behind every role, every polished smile, was a woman confronting her own contradictions.
grace and guilt, light and darkness, ambition and vulnerability. That honesty, once her greatest burden, became her greatest weapon. When young actresses now enter Hollywood, they often mention her not as a distant star, but as a compass. They remember her speeches about empathy, her refusal to tear down other women for applause, her courage to speak about mental health before it became a trend. Anne's voice, steady and deliberate, echoed what many felt but couldn't say: that success means nothing if it costs your soul. Her Oscar for Les Misérables was a moment of cinematic immortality, but her true award came years later: the ability to walk through red carpets again with peace in her eyes, no longer hiding, no longer defending, just existing. That quiet confidence became the symbolism of her story, the triumph of the human heart over the noise of the world. There is something deeply universal in her journey. She represents the millions of women told they are too much, too emotional, too ambitious, too outspoken, and shows that the very traits society once mocked can become the foundation of power. Her story reminds us that sensitivity is not weakness, that failure is not final, and that forgiveness, especially self-forgiveness, can be revolutionary. When film historians speak of her work, they highlight the range, from the innocence of the Princess Diaries to the devastation of Les Misérables, from the grace of The Devil Wears Prada to the surreal bravery of Colossal. But beyond the films lies a thread connecting them all: the portrayal of women searching for their truth in a world that wants to define them. That is Anne Hathaway's greatest artistic fingerprint. In her interviews, there's a serenity now, a kind of unspoken wisdom. She often smiles at the irony that the same media that once tore her down now celebrates her resilience. But she doesn't seek revenge. She doesn't need to. The world came full circle, and she remains standing, softer but unbroken. To many, she is no longer just an actress. She is a mirror, reflecting the struggle of being seen and unseen, loved and hated, rising and falling, and rising again. Her legacy transcends Hollywood. It belongs to anyone who has ever been misunderstood for simply being themselves. And in that quiet transcendence lies the symbolism of Anne Hathaway, the girl who learned that even when the lights fade, the truth within still glows. She showed the world that survival is not about outshining others. It's about outlasting your own fear. Her legacy is not written in the applause of a moment, but in the whispers of those she inspired, those who, because of her, found courage in their imperfections.
Epilogue. Visual montage. The screen begins to dim. The music softens. A quiet piano melody, echoing like a memory that refuses to fade. The camera drifts through fragments of Anne Hathaway's life, not as a timeline, but as a soul's reflection. A flicker of a young girl, barely 13, rehearsing lines in front of a bedroom mirror, her eyes filled with wonder and innocence, the faint laughter of her mother guiding her through the rhythm of dreams. Cut to years later, the blinding flashes of paparazzi lights, the red carpets, the trembling hand clutching her first Oscar. For a moment, the world feels infinite. But beneath that glow, there's a single breath, fragile, uncertain, human. The images begin to merge. A soft montage unfolds. Anne sitting alone in a dressing room, removing her makeup after a long day, staring at her reflection as if searching for the girl she once was. The sound of rain against a window pane becomes a quiet heartbeat. Then her smile, genuine this time, as she holds her child, sunlight spilling across her face. The applause of the past fades into the laughter of the present. A scene from Les Misérables lingers, her trembling voice singing, "I dreamed a dream." The raw ache of that moment now transformed into something prophetic. The dream didn't die. It simply changed shape. It grew softer, quieter, more real. Slow motion. Anne walking through a New York street, unrecognized, unguarded. The world passes by. The city hums. The lights shimmer. Her eyes lift toward the sky, and for a second, she smiles as if she finally understands what freedom feels like. The narrator's voice fades, replaced by silence, just her breathing, her presence. Then the screen turns black, and a single line appears in elegant white text. "The light you seek has always been within you." A.H. The music swells again, delicate strings and soft piano, a tone not of sadness, but of peace. As the credits roll, archival footage plays, Anne laughing between takes, hugging co-stars, wiping tears during an interview. Real moments. Human ones. Each frame a reminder that behind every legend is a heartbeat. Behind every icon, a person who dared to feel. The final image, her silhouette standing in the distance, back turned to the camera, a gentle breeze moving through her hair. The sun sets slowly behind her. Not an ending, but a continuation. A quiet promise that her story, like all great stories, never truly ends.